Go to Job chapter 23, and I want you to look at verse 1 through 3 with me, and then we'll move down to another verse or so. Then Job answered and said, "Even today is my complaint bitter. My stroke is heavier than my groaning. Oh, that I knew where I might find him, that I might come even to his seat." And then if you go down to verse 16 and 17, "For God maketh my heart soft, and the Almighty troubleth me, because I was not cut off before the darkness, neither hath he covered the darkness from my face." I want to talk to you tonight a little bit about this matter of darkness, about when the way is dark, and what it means to pray in the dark. Some time ago, Pastor Hughes, this has been quite a while ago, but he called me, and he and I talk quite often. In fact, we talked today on the phone, and I called him, and he said, "Well, I'm glad you called. I was going to call you." I said, "What did you want to call me for?" He said, "Nothing. I just wanted to talk." He said, "What do you want?" I said, "Nothing. We were just going to talk." So we talked about nothing for about 15, 20 minutes. But I enjoy fellowshipping with him. But he called me one time, and he said, "Do you ever just feel like when you're praying that there's nobody there, and that your prayers are not getting any higher than the ceiling?" And I had to chuckle and laugh when he said it, because it's a common experience. And I said, "Of course, of course." And I'm confident that everybody in this room has experienced that. That there are times when it seems like you're just simply praying in the dark, and there doesn't seem to be any light, and especially sometimes when you're going through grief, and you're going through the loss of a loved one, or you're going through maybe some sickness that is terminal, or it could be, or maybe you've been deserted, husband or wife, somebody's been unfaithful to you, and your heart has been broken. Or there just seems to be times when you pray and you try to find God, you can't find him. Now that certainly is Job's complaint in these passages. He said, "Even today," verse 2, "Even today my complaint is bitter. My yoke, or my stroke, is heavier than my groaning." In other words, the wound is more severe than my complaint. In fact, he said, "I don't even have the words to describe the hurt that I have and the pain that I feel." Verse 3, "Oh, that I knew where I might find him, that I might come even to his seat." And then down in verse 17, he said, "Because I was not cut off before the darkness," talking about an untimely birth. He said, "If I had died in my mother's womb, I wouldn't be going through this darkness. Neither hath he covered the darkness from my face." That is, he didn't protect me from the darkness that I'm going through. And you can be sure that if men like Job and others went through these seemingly impossible, difficult days, that you and I are going to go through them. And God is going to allow you to go through them. In fact, they are part of the Christian life. And so there are times when we pray, and it just seems so natural, it just flows. And we're almost caught up in the rapture of the relationship and the fellowship with God. But there are other times, many occasions, when it seems like a monologue that you're talking and nobody's there. And God feels distant, and he doesn't seem to hear. As someone said, it's like beating at heaven's door with bruised knuckles in the dark. And maybe some of you tonight feel that way, that you've been praying in the dark. And if you trusted your senses, then you would be sure that God was not present. And that's the way it feels. It feels like loneliness. Sometimes we chide Christians and say, "Well, you're saved. You should never feel lonely or alone." But first of all, that's unfair. And secondly, it's unscriptural. Because everybody at some times feels alone and feels lonely. And we feel that we're the only person who's ever experienced what we're going through. I know intellectually that other people have been there, but I'm not dealing with intellect. I'm dealing with emotion. I'm dealing with feeling. I'm dealing with my spirit. And at that time, you do feel like you're the only person going through it. And people often try, they try to offer kind words, but they cannot understand the darkness. If you look at verse 8 in this chapter 23, he said, "Behold, I go forward, but he is not there. And I go backward, but I cannot perceive him." Job said, "I can't find him. I'm all alone." At least that's the way it feels. Now, doctrinally, Job never was alone. But I'm not talking about doctrine. I'm talking about the moods and the feelings and the experiences that we go through. And many times our experiences don't match our theology, do they? I mean, we know, but that's just not the way it is as far as experience is concerned. And so we go through these in chapter 9 and verse 11. Chapter 9 in the book of Job in verse 11. "Lo, he goeth before me, and I see him not. He passeth on also, but I perceive him not." He says, I know God is there. I know that. I know God is everywhere. We say, I know God is everywhere, and we mean it. But many times our experience doesn't catch up with our profession. And so when we're praying in the dark, we feel lonely and alone in the world. And that's exactly where Job was, and that's exactly where some of you have been, some of you may be, and some of you will be. Because it's part of the Christian experience. It's part of life. We not only feel lonely, we feel abandoned. We feel like perhaps that God has left us. God seems to have left us or is indifferent to what is happening. I mean, sometimes, you're going through pain, you're going through a heartache, you're going through tragedy, and it just seems that God is totally indifferent to what you're going through. But you're not the first person that ever thought that. David said in Psalm 10, verse 1, he said, "Why standest thou afar off, O Lord? Why hidest thou thyself in the time of trouble?" Think about that. David is wanting to know, where are you, God, in the time of trouble? Why do you hide your face when we're going through this trouble? Why do you stand afar off? He wasn't questioning the goodness of God. He just didn't understand what was going on. And you don't either. I don't either. Why is it when a little child is racked with fever and maybe on a deathbed and we're praying that many times it seems like God is totally indifferent and that we've been abandoned? I assure you we haven't, but our feelings are something different. He said in Psalm 3, verse 1 through 3, "How long wilt thou forget me, O Lord? Forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long shall I take counsel in my soul, having sorrow in my heart daily?" That's the best believer in the Old Testament talking. That's King David. That's the best Christian in the Bible, or at least in the Old Testament. That's how he felt. That's how he questioned. He felt like he'd been abandoned by God. And by the way, I would say it's okay for you to feel that way at times. I didn't say to believe that. I said to feel that way. They're not the same. Many of you believe your feelings. See? I'm not saying to believe your feelings. I'm saying that feelings come and go. And you know what we want to do? We want to get in the mode of denying our feelings. We want to deny that we have these thoughts. We want to deny that we're ever lonely. I said something recently, Chris, we've got to put on this appearance that we are in control, that we are on top of the world, that everything is wonderful. When deep down inside, we're not in control, everything is not okay, and everything is not wonderful. And so we have to almost live a lie. I'm not saying that we should stand before people and pour out all of our dirty laundry. I mean, we have a laundry room, and we have a hamper, and we keep the dirty stuff there. But we've got it, and so do you. So I'm not advocating, displaying it. I am advocating that we stop denying. We need to stop that. Sometimes we do feel lonely. Sometimes we do feel abandoned. He said, "Consider and hear me, O Lord, my God. Lighten mine eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death." He cried in another place in chapter 13 and verse 1. He said, "How long, O Lord, will you forget me? Forever?" It's good for you to see these. It's good for you to realize that these were real people in the Bible. And much of Christianity that we see is not real. We're never supposed to have a family problem. We're never supposed to be sick. We're never supposed to have a financial problem. We're never supposed to be sad. We're never supposed to be depressed. Did you know Charles Haddon Spurgeon, the Prince of Preachers, had fits of depression that almost killed him? That's one of the great, he's called the Prince of Preachers, even by preachers today. But he never denied it. I read one of his sermons just recently where he talked about how he just got over a fit of depression. He thought he was going to die. We could never tell people we're depressed. We could never tell people we have the blues. Now, we have them quite often at our house. But chapter 13, look at verse 1. "How long wilt thou forget me, O Lord, forever? How long wilt thou hide thy face from me?" That's how he felt. God hadn't forgotten him. God wasn't going to forget him. But believe me, we go through experiences and times when we're praying in the dark and going through periods of darkness that we do feel lonely and we feel like we've been abandoned by God. And here's some of the best saints in the Old Testament, Job and David, making that clear. Sometimes when we're praying in the dark, we feel overwhelmed by crises. We feel overwhelmed by crises. Nothing seems to make sense. We feel like victims of a cruel game, discouraged and hopeless. And we need to hear the word of Jesus. When he was at Gethsemane, he said, "My soul is exceedingly sorrowful." In the garden, he prayed. He said, "My soul is exceedingly sorrowful." That would not have been a good day for him to have been on the 700 Club. Jim and Tammy would have edited this out. But it's there. "My soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even unto death." That's the Son of God. If he had a time where his soul was exceedingly sorrowful to where he would die, what makes you think you're exempt from periods like that? What makes you think you're exempt from those valleys and from the crises and from situations that just overwhelm you? You see, we just expect everybody to be so strong they can't be broken. We think resolve and spiritual strength are the same thing. They're not the same. A lost man can have resolve. "My head is bloody but unbowed." Maybe that's why it's bloody. You need to learn to bow it. And so there's this crisis, and we feel like victims, as I said. And Jesus said, he said, "Tarry here and watch." We are going to find it I believe, in the experiences of Jesus Christ, because he went through the very same thing. Now, the thing we need to know, even though we feel this way, and I've been there, and you have been there, some of you may be there, and most of us are going to be there again. Don't kid yourself. But the wonderful thing is that we're not alone. We're not alone, no matter how we feel. And a pastor made a hospital visit to a young woman undergoing chemotherapy for stomach cancer. 10 years earlier, she had brain cancer, and she overcame that by God's grace. And she was battling for her life, and she pointed to the Bible, and she said to her pastor, "What can you say to me at a time like this?" Any kind of answer the pastor would give, I'm sure, would seem empty and meaningless and uncaring. So he said, I don't have easy words of comfort for you. He said, can you read, said, you can read through the Bible and you won't find answers to this question that you're going through. But you will find your question in the book because others have walked this same path. So you're not alone. You're in good company. Basically this. I can't give you answers why you have cancer. I can't give you the answer to that. I don't have anything to say. There's nothing. I can't tell you why you have a terminal illness. I can't tell you why you lose a child. I can't tell you why your mother, your father, somebody dies. I don't have an answer for that. But I can tell you where to turn in the Bible where others have had the same question. You can say, oh yeah, all are sin. That's real comforting. But why? There are other sinners that don't die at that age. They live to be 100 years old. So that's not an answer. Oh yeah, we all die because we're sinners. I mean, we can say that from the pulpit, but that's not good therapy when you're counseling somebody. And so you don't have an answer. Sometimes the best answer is quietness. Sometimes the best answer is silence. Or sometimes the best answer is show that greater people have asked the same question. Job answers it. I asked that question. And he never did get a complete answer. All he was to do was trust God. Job prayed in the dark. He didn't have an answer. He was confused. You read the whole book and see how frustrated he was. And yet he was a far better Christian than any of us. He was a godly man, feared God, prayed for his kids every day, offered sacrifices for them every day. Just in case they might have cursed God while they were having a party, he went and offered sacrifices for them. He was a good man, wasn't he? And he loved his children, but he lost all of them. He was eyes to the blind. He was feet to the lame. He was ears to the deaf. Talked about how he fed and clothed and cared for the widows and others and orphans. And finally, you find him where his wife says, why don't you curse God and die? He was in the dark, and he was praying. David prayed in the dark. We just saw some of it here, and you'll see it throughout these Psalms. And I challenge you, as you read these Psalms, pay attention to the situation that he finds himself in over and over and over. He was a godly man, and yet he spent much of his life running from Saul, who tried to kill him. Here's a great man, a king, hiding in a cave. I'm a good Christian. I shouldn't have to go through this. I'm a good Christian. I shouldn't be in the dark. I'm a good Christian. I shouldn't have to suffer. Why not? And Job prayed. Esther fasted and prayed in the dark. Her entire nation was about to be wiped out. Daniel prayed in the dark. He was cast into the lion's den. John prayed in the dark, quite literally. And I was reading about a Sunday school teacher who was trying to get a class of 6-year-old boys to imagine what it must have been like for Jonah. Jonah prayed in the dark, and so the teacher asked the students what they would do if they found themselves trapped in the belly of a large fish. One said, I'd build a fire and burn a hole and crawl out. Another said, I'd stomp on his tongue until he spit me out. A third said, I would cry real loud for my daddy and he'd come and get me out. And that reply certainly captures our imaginations as we think about what we have to do when we're in the dark, is we have to cry. And eventually he brings us out. The dark is not here to stay. There's a text that says, and it came to pass. The old Negro preacher said, that's my text this morning. He said, I just want you to know that it didn't come to stay. It came to pass. And only a black preacher can take a text like that and just write it, boy. You see. But it came to pass. The Apostle Paul prayed in the dark. He had a thorn in the flesh. And he prayed. Jesus prayed in the dark. On the cross, he says, my God, why? Why? You get it? My God, why? That's what you pray a lot of times. Why? Why? You will pray that. You will. Why? I've prayed it. I still don't have an answer. I don't have an answer. But I can go to the Bible and find others who've prayed the prayer. Why? Why art thou so far off, O Lord? Why standest thou afar off? Why? Jesus asked his disciples to sit and to wait while he prayed. He didn't ask them to pray for him. He didn't ask them to plead his cause or his case. But he said, why don't you sit and watch while I pray? And I believe that's what Jesus asks us to do in the time of darkness, is to watch and wait. Because God has something to show us in the dark. He has a reason. In Romans 8:28, the Apostle Paul said, likewise the Spirit also helpeth our infirmities. Listen carefully. For we know not what we should pray for as we ought. Why, you don't even know how to pray. I don't know how to pray. I don't know what God is doing in a situation. How could I possibly know? I don't know what he's doing. When you feel like leaving a church, listen to me. When you feel like leaving a church, is it God leading you or is it the devil trying to get you out? How do you know? So I don't like the preacher, so it must be God trying to get me out. That'll work. But you understand what I'm getting at here? It's very hard to know. It's hard to know. Is it better for you to be in the circumstances you are in? Is it really better? It may be. Paul prayed 3 times for the thorn to be removed. Would it have been better for it to have been removed? Absolutely not. He said, my grace is sufficient for you. God could have removed it, but he didn't. You read in the book of Hebrews in chapter 11 about all those who were delivered. You keep reading, you read about all those who were not delivered in the same chapter. Why not? Same God, same darkness, but some were delivered and some were sawn asunder. Some stopped the mouths of lions, others fed the mouths of lions. You get the picture, what I'm trying to get across to you. You have to trust him. He knows what he's doing in all circumstances. He knows what he's doing. Now we see through a glass how? Darkly. See, we have enough light to live. We have more light than we're living up to, but we don't have all light. You know, we've all been taught to affirm that God is omnipresent everywhere. And in our experience, however, it seems that at times he's closer than at other times. I love that. I love to sense God's presence. Doctrinally and all of this, I know that God is everywhere. But I like to sense his presence, if you know what I mean. And I like to know he was there. David was aware of this. Would you look at Psalm 139, verse 7?